Mark Ruffalo stepped into the luxurious restaurant in the heart of the city dressed simply, in wrinkled clothes as if he had just returned from a morning walk. As the light filtered through the crystal chandeliers and softly touched his skin, he chose a quiet table at the back of the restaurant so as not to attract attention. Before he could decide what to order, a waiter approached him with a mocking look and asked in a condescending tone, "Can you afford to be here?" The soft laughter from other customers rippled through the room, but a truth about to be revealed would change the entire atmosphere. Before diving into the story, if you enjoy these kinds of real-life human stories, give the video a like and leave a comment below with the city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow at 12:30 p.m., there's another heartwarming story just for you. Lumiere Restaurant, a symbol of elegance in Beverly Hills, was located right in the heart of a prestigious street. Those looking out the windows could see sports cars gliding slowly down the neon-lit streets. Every detail inside was carefully chosen to create an impressive atmosphere. Lumiere was more than just a restaurant. It was a stage for those who wanted to be noticed. One of the most experienced waiters at the restaurant walked through the dining room with a practiced smile on his face. Her hair was perfectly styled in an updo, and she wore a custom-made uniform. This wasn't just a job for her, it was a privilege. Ashley wore it with pride. Working at this iconic Beverly Hills establishment was like wearing a badge of honor. But Ashley had another side, a flashy pride and an arrogance that knew no bounds. Classifying customers based on their attire and demeanor had become almost second nature to her. "This place is too much for some people," she often thought to herself. The glass door opened elegantly and a man entered. He wore worn jeans, a plain shirt, and an unbranded comfortable jacket. His posture was far from flashy. He was almost invisible. He walked silently toward the reception desk. Despite being one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, Mark Ruffalo never used his fame or fortune as a tool for self-promotion. His simple, introverted demeanor stood in stark contrast to the extravagant, dazzling glamour of Beverly Hills. At that moment, he looked like any other customer walking in. Nothing more, nothing less. Ashley was talking to another employee at the reception desk about VIP reservations. When she noticed Mark, she paused, cut off her conversation, and couldn't suppress the condescending expression that involuntarily settled on her face. She narrowed her eyes and looked him up and down. His clothes didn't fit the customer profile she was used to. She tilted her head slightly and tried to force a smile onto her face. "Good evening," she said in a cold, mechanical tone. Her smile vanished in an instant. "How can I assist you? Would you like a table?" Mark replied in his usual, sincere yet soft tone. "Yes, I'm here for dinner." Ashley raised her eyebrows as if she had heard something strange. Her expression clearly said, "Who is this?" She crossed her arms over her chest. Her smile gave way to outright coldness. "Did you want to come here? This isn't what you think. It's a very special place." Mark bowed his head slightly. His calm expression unchanged, he smiled sincerely. "I know. That's why I'm here." Ashley pursed her lips and let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "Fine," she said, and quickly turned away, heading for the office. She typed her name into the reservation system with a theatrical flourish. When nothing appeared on the screen, she rolled her eyes and reluctantly returned. "Just as I thought. There are no reservations," she said, her voice tinged with obvious disdain. "We have a couple of tables available, but you should know that this isn't just any restaurant." Mark's face showed no sign of discomfort. On the contrary, his calm and patient demeanor was beginning to gnaw at Ashley. "I want to eat here," Mark said in the same soft but firm tone. Ashley grabbed the menu with an exaggerated sigh. "Okay, but I'll need to seat you somewhere appropriate. Please follow me," she said, walking quickly toward the dining room, without checking to see if Mark was following her. She led him to the farthest, almost forgotten corner of the restaurant. Instead of the central tables bathed in the golden glow of candlesticks, they stood in a dim, restless spot near the kitchen. The clinking of dishes and the staff's backstage whispers seemed to sever this corner from the dining room's spirit. She slammed the menu down on the table so it could be heard. "Here, this table is ideal for you," he said with feigned politeness. "If you need anything, but only if it's necessary, you can call me, okay?" Mark ignored the passive-aggressive tone in his voice. He met his gaze with a sincere smile and nodded politely. Thank you. I'm sure this will be an interesting experience. As Ashley walked away, she muttered sarcastically, loud enough for a nearby couple to hear. He won't last 5 minutes. I bet he'll leave as soon as he opens the menu. Mark ignored her words and opened the menu. He slowly scanned the pages with the patience of someone in no hurry. Live piano music filled the room, and his calmness spread a sense of peace to the corner where he sat. Ashley watched him from a distance with a confident smile. He'll get up and leave soon, she thought to herself. But Mark was studying the menu in detail, as if savoring it. Instead of guiding him to a table in the heart of the restaurant, illuminated by ornate candelabras, Ashley had seated him in this dim corner spot without even bothering to look at it. It seemed more special, but it was actually meant to exclude him. Here you are, Ashley said, placing the menu back on the table. This is quieter, more special. Mark turned his eyes to Ashley. His smile was still sincere, his voice gentle. Thank you. Ashley crossed her arms over her chest and looked closely at his face. It was as if she was trying to figure out if he really felt comfortable here, but there was still a cold glint in her eyes that showed she didn't want him there. Ashley crossed her arms over her chest and narrowed her eyes. It was as if she was trying to figure out whether the man in front of her was being sarcastic or just clueless. She spoke with a forced politeness in her voice. You're welcome. Just so you know, these tables are usually reserved for special guests, but we can make an exception tonight. Without giving Mark a chance to respond, she quickly turned on her heels and walked away from the table. When she returned a few moments later, her demeanor had grown even more stern. She pulled out her notepad with an exaggerated gesture and glanced at Mark with an almost hostile expression. What would you like to order? Mark calmly scanned the menu. Then he pointed to a dish in the middle of the page. I'd like to try that, he said with a smile. He was pointing to the most expensive main course on the menu. Ashley could barely contain her laughter. She covered her mouth to hide her mockery, then spoke with feigned politeness. Sure. The star-studded filet de Rossini. A classic choice, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She lowered her head and added with a mocking smile, just to be sure, you know this dish costs $350, right? Mark nodded without the slightest sign of nervousness. His smile remained unchanged. Yes, it sounds wonderful. Ashley wrote down the order, exhaling dramatically. She made herself feel like she was making a huge sacrifice. All right, just to be clear, $350. I recommend you double-check the price. No one wants an unpleasant surprise. Mark remained silent again, only nodding in agreement. I'm sure, he said calmly. Ashley paused for a moment, then bowed her head, but she still couldn't suppress her inner arrogance. Our chef prefers that such dishes be eaten by people who truly appreciate good food. I hope you enjoy it. Just as she was about to turn away, she stopped again, as if to deliver a final blow. And one more thing. The minimum tip here is 20%. Don't forget that while you're enjoying your meal. Mark seemed unfazed by her sarcastic tone. He was completely focused on the details of the decor and the pianist. His eyes were filled with genuine admiration for the elegance of the place. A short while later, the appetizers arrived. Ashley placed the plate on the table with a sharp thud. The plate slid across the table. Your appetizer is here, she said sarcastically. I hope you like it, or at least know what you're eating. Mark smiled slightly, bowing his head. Thank you. Ashley bowed slightly, almost whispering, unable to reciprocate his sincerity. Not many people choose this dish, but I thought it would suit you. Mark made eye contact with a graceful smile. It looks nice. Thank you for thinking of me. Ashley's expression fell for a moment. Not being able to provoke him felt like hitting his piece and bouncing back. Have a good day, said Ashley, her voice still tinged with condescension. Mark looked at her with his usual calm and warm expression. It looks delicious. Thank you for your interest, he said politely. Ashley clenched her teeth in frustration at not getting any negative reaction. She turned away, her anger rising inside her, and whispered slyly to a coworker as she hurried away. That guy won't even make it to the main course. He'll run out as soon as he sees the bill. At that moment, Mark was on the other side of the dining room, continuing to eat his appetizers in peace. He savored every bite, looking around with interest at the details around him. He had a quiet but powerful presence. Ashley watched him from a distance, her arms crossed over her chest. When she noticed that Mark was lost in thought, a malicious smile appeared on her lips. "I bet these types are all the same," she said to the employee next to her. However, his colleague must have found these words offensive, as he turned his head away and chose not to respond. At that moment, an elderly man sitting at a nearby table was watching the scene unfold. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his navy suit was spotless. He slowly raised his wine glass and gave a slight nod to Mark Ruffalo. Mark noticed the gesture. He smiled and bowed his head slightly in response. Despite everything that had happened, he managed to maintain his composure. Dinner had only just begun, but Ashley's condescension was starting to become noticeable in the room. And this was only the beginning. Mark's order had been taken, but Ashley seemed determined to make sure he didn't have the experience he deserved at this restaurant. Instead of sending his order directly to the kitchen, she started paying attention to other tables. She got into a conversation with the elegant couple in the middle, laughed loudly at a customer's ordinary joke, and even carried a cocktail that belonged to another table. As time passed, Mark continued to wait patiently. He didn't react or show any sign of discomfort. He even avoided eye contact, choosing not to respond to Ashley's glances. Ashley walked past his table several times. Each time she acted busy, averted her eyes, and even quickened her pace deliberately. Finally, the elderly customer who had been watching from a distance stood up. He walked slowly but confidently toward Mark's table. He approached with a gentle smile. "Good evening, young man," he said in a soft but firm voice. "I apologize if I've disturbed you, but I noticed that you've been overlooked here." Mark looked up at him and smiled sincerely. "Good evening. Don't worry, it's really no problem. Everything is fine." The elderly man smiled slightly. Then he leaned closer to Mark and added in a whisper. "Sometimes such treatment tests our patience, but you showed great grace by maintaining your composure." As Mark was about to thank him, Ashley suddenly appeared. Her face wore a forced expression of politeness. "Sir, may I help you?" she asked the old man, her voice much more polite than before, but with a hint of authority. "I don't want you to disturb our customer." The old man narrowed his eyes slightly but remained polite. He replied calmly, "Don't worry, ma'am. I was just saying hello to this gentleman. It's not often we see such a calm demeanor." Ashley couldn't respond to these words, because without realizing it, the entire room had stopped watching her and was now watching Mark Ruffalo's demeanor. Ashley pointed toward the old man's table with an exaggerated sigh. "Perhaps you should return to your table and finish your meal," she said, her impatience now impossible to hide. Mark simply watched this brief interaction. His expression remained calm, but his eyes were attentive and searching. Then he turned back to the old man. "Thank you for your time," he said, nodding politely. "It was a pleasure talking to you." The old man smiled and quietly returned to his table. But before leaving, he shot Ashley a clear, disapproving look. Ashley, however, continued to act as if she hadn't noticed. After a while, Ashley finally decided to bring Mark his main course. But she didn't hesitate to delay it. First, she stopped by the kitchen and chatted with the chefs for a long time. Mark's meal was left to wait under the warming lamp. Then she returned to the dining room to serve another table, completely ignoring Mark's ready plate. Finally, she brought the meal with an exaggerated gesture. She placed the plate firmly in front of Mark. The sound of the plate lightly hitting the porcelain surface was drowned out by the silence around the table. "Your order is ready. Enjoy your meal," Ashley said, her voice dripping with condescension. She then added with a mocking smile, "If you don't like it, we can arrange a more affordable alternative." Mark bowed his head and thanked her calmly. "It looks delicious. Thank you very much." Ashley leaned toward him as if to add another dose of sarcasm, lowering her voice so that only Mark could hear. "Did you know that this meal has a really sophisticated taste?" Mark didn't hesitate for a moment and smiled just as sincerely. "I'm sure you do," he said. "Thank you for your concern." Ashley walked away, inwardly furious at not getting a reaction. She immediately went over to a co-worker working at the bar and spoke in a condescending tone. He's trying to be nice, but you can tell he's uncomfortable, she said, placing her empty glass on the counter. I'm not even sure he knows what he's eating. These types are all the same. They come here to feel important for a moment, but in the end, they just make fools of themselves. The co-worker heard Ashley's words but avoided responding. Still, he gave a slight smile, feeling a bit embarrassed. Maybe he just wants to have dinner, Ashley. Maybe we should treat him like the other customers. Ashley raised her eyebrows and gave him a nearly dismissive look. Ashley ignored her coworkers. Maybe we should treat her like the other customers comment. Instead, she rolled her eyes and whispered in a condescending tone, like the other customers. Did you see those boots? She doesn't belong here. And frankly, if she can't handle this environment, she shouldn't have walked in the door. Meanwhile, the couple who had been quietly observing the entire evening began whispering again. That woman is really awful, the woman said, shaking her head. The man is extremely polite, but she's constantly trying to put him down. The man frowned and nodded in agreement. Absolutely. This is truly embarrassing. We need to say something to the manager. Mark was calmly finishing his main course amid all the whispering. He had, of course, noticed the glances from the other customers, but there was not the slightest sign of unease on his face. With every bite, he seemed to carry a kind of inner peace, as if he were swallowing the chaos around him. When Ashley returned to the table, she still wore a condescending smile. As she cleared the plates, she asked in a voice tinged with artificial kindness, "How was the meal? Did it meet your expectations?" Mark looked up and met her gaze directly. His voice was sincere but firm. It was perfect. Please thank the chef. They did an absolutely flawless job. Ashley didn't know how to respond. She raised her eyebrows slightly, her arrogant demeanor showing the first signs of cracking. Still, as she turned away, she muttered, but loud enough for Mark to hear, "He may be smiling now, but let's see if he still is when the bill comes." Mark was still sitting in his chair. The smile on his face hadn't faded. It had only deepened slightly. His eyes focused on the distance for a moment, as if signaling that a decision was approaching. Ashley couldn't suppress the uneasiness that came from not being able to provoke him, fueling his inner pride even more. This time he raised the bar a little higher. After bringing Mark the coffee he wanted, he spoke in a tone of voice that could be clearly heard by several tables nearby. That's the problem. Everyone thinks they can come and go as they please. Then we have to work hard to maintain our standards. At the end of her sentence, she shot Mark a direct glance. It was harsh and condescending. Her colleague nearby tried to change the subject. Embarrassed, "Ashley, why don't you check the kitchen? Maybe the chef needs something." But Ashley cut him off and raised her voice a little. "That's why we have a reservation policy, to prevent situations like this." At this point, silence fell over several tables in the dining room. Some customers frowned, others began to whisper. Eyes began to turn not to Ashley but to Mark Ruffalo, but Mark was still taking small sips of his coffee and maintaining his composure. The couple who had been watching the incident from the beginning were now clearly angry. The woman placed her hand on her chest and muttered with genuine disappointment, "This is a complete disgrace. He's trying to humiliate the man in front of everyone." The man next to her shook his head, his eyes still on Mark Ruffalo's table. "Watching this is embarrassing. Someone should tell the manager." An elderly man sitting at another table was also watching the events unfold. He took a heavy sip of his wine, placed the glass on the table, and fixed his gaze on Ashley before speaking in a low voice. "This has gone too far." Despite all the stares, Mark was still sitting at his table. There was no anger in his eyes, no sign of tension on his face. His calmness was almost like an impressive resistance. He was watching the entire room but not letting anything shake him. Ashley, however, felt the weight of the eyes around her and grew increasingly uneasy. The elegantly dressed woman, 2 tables away, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "If he can stay this calm, he's definitely not an ordinary person. Anyone else would have left by now." Her friend looked at her, then glanced back at Mark and replied, "Or maybe, he's much stronger than we think." Ashley seemed to have noticed the whispers. She turned back to Mark's table with increasing irritation. This time, with a more sarcastic expression, she asked with a fake smile, "Is everything okay?" "I hope you're enjoying yourself," she said with a fake smile. "After all, having different kinds of people here gives the restaurant a special atmosphere." Mark looked at Ashley without averting his gaze. His smile was gone, but his expression was not angry, just serious and dignified. His voice was slow and calm, but its weight filled the room. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Ashley paused for a moment. She let out a nervous laugh, then tried to lighten the mood with her voice. "Don't get me wrong. It's just usually more traditional types come here. Someone like you. Someone like you rarely comes here." Her words hung in the air, because the room had suddenly fallen silent. Customers at nearby tables stopped talking. Everyone was literally holding their breath. Eyes were on Mark, ears tuned in for Ashley's response. Ashley was aware of the anticipation around her, but she still believed she was in control. Her pride was hidden behind her arrogant demeanor. But Mark still didn't take his eyes off her. His face wasn't expressionless. It was stern, but it didn't carry anger. It seemed to represent something more than just this moment. He was about to speak, not just for himself, but for everyone in the room who was silently watching. Finally, Mark didn't break eye contact. His tone was still calm, but the meaning behind his words was clear. "Maybe I should handle this differently." Ashley blinked in surprise. She opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, the restaurant manager appeared at the door. He was impeccably dressed, walked with measured steps, and exuded natural authority. His eyes scanned the room quickly, and when they landed on Mark Ruffalo, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. His expression changed instantly. He completely ignored Ashley. He quickly walked over to Mark's table. "Mr. Ruffalo," he said, his voice sincere but clearly respectful. "We didn't know you'd be here today. You honor us with your presence. How can I help you?" Ashley's color drained instantly. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. In shock, she looked first at the director, then at Mark. Her heart felt like it was in her throat. All those condescending words were now buried in silence. Mark met the principal's gaze politely. Then he slowly turned his head toward Ashley. His voice was gentle but full, echoing throughout the room. "I think we need to have a talk about how people are treated here." The silence in the room deepened. Only the faint clinking of spoons and cautious breathing could be heard. Everyone was waiting for the next word. All eyes were on Mark Ruffalo. The manager seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. His face suddenly became serious. Ignoring Ashley completely, he turned to Mark and bowed slightly. "Mr. Ruffalo, please accept my sincerest apologies for not recognizing you. It is a great privilege to have you here with us tonight. I will do everything I can to make up for your experience. Please tell me, what would you like?" There was a noticeable change in his voice. Ashley, who had thought he was in control of the entire room just moments ago, now seemed frozen. His breath had caught in his throat. He had been trying to make sense of everything that had happened since the beginning. "Mr. Ruffalo, he knows him. No. Is this real?" he thought to himself. His eyes darted around the room, his mind racing to accept the reality of the situation. Mark smiled slowly at the manager. His eyes were tired but calm. "Thank you, but please, don't worry. Everything is fine. I just need to have a quick word with your staff." The manager shook his head seriously. Instinctively, he knew there was something that needed to be fixed here. "Of course, Mr. Ruffalo, whenever you're ready." Then he turned his gaze to Ashley. There was a sharp but silent reproach in his eyes. Ashley staggered as if she couldn't stand under that gaze. She stood beside them like a shadow, her face pale, her eyes lost. Ashley began to stammer desperately, trying to regain control. I didn't know. I thought..." As she tried to gather her thoughts, the manager interrupted her in a low voice, but with an undeniable harshness in his tone. "It doesn't matter what you thought, Ashley. That man is one of the owners of this restaurant." Ashley's eyes widened. A pale "what?" slipped from her lips. Her face drained of color. Her hands trembled. The scenes she had replayed in her mind now made sense. Every word, every glance, everything now looked different. She took another step forward to defend herself. He didn't say who he was. I just, his, I mean, her voice trembled and caught in her throat because she knew that no matter what she said, nothing could fix that moment. Mark Ruffalo finally spoke. His voice was still calm, but every word echoed slowly through the room. I don't need to tell you who I am to be treated with respect. Frankly, it doesn't matter. He paused. He slowly scanned the room. Everyone who walks through this door, regardless of their appearance, name, or past, deserves the same respect. Everyone in the room was frozen. The silence was almost palpable. The waiters had stopped moving. There was no sound of cutlery. Breaths were shallow. Some of the customers sitting at the tables moved closer to each other. Whispering began in hushed tones. I knew he was different. His presence alone was striking, but his voice is so calm. Look how elegantly he said everything. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of their silence. Others turned to Ashley and shot her angry glances. But the most noticeable feeling in that moment was the silence and the weight of a lesson being learned. The manager turned to Ashley. His face was twisted with disappointment. His voice was both tired and determined. Ashley, I want a detailed report on your behavior tonight at the end of your shift. For now, step away from this desk. He paused for a moment. I'll handle the rest. Ashley nodded, caught between shame and emptiness. In her eyes, there was not only regret, but also the pain of seeing herself in the mirror for the first time. Ashley opened her mouth to say something, but the manager's single stern gaze sent the words back into her throat. She swallowed, bowed her head, and suddenly turned away. Silently, but with shame in her steps, she walked out of the salon, past the curious glances of the customers. The salon was still silent. Mark Ruffalo took a deep breath. He slowly rose from his chair. He looked around. He felt all eyes on him. Standing in the middle of the room, his voice was neither loud nor soft, but every word he spoke echoed throughout the room. This restaurant is not just a place. It was created to be a place where people can feel comfortable and valued, regardless of their appearance, background, or status. He paused. His eyes scanned the room from one end to the other. Unfortunately, today, we strayed from that purpose. But I believe that every moment can be a lesson. And today, we all learned something. The customers in the room listened in silence. Some nodded, others looked away. Some had regret on their faces, but they all felt that Mark's words had touched them in some way. The manager stood a few steps back. His face showed both admiration and a hint of embarrassment. He leaned slightly toward Mark. Mark turned to him. His voice was soft but determined. I'd like to have a short meeting with the entire team after the dining room closes. There are some important things we need to discuss. The manager bowed his head in deep respect. Of course, Mr. Ruffalo. I apologize again for everything. Mark nodded again and slowly sat back down. The dining room began to stir again, but the atmosphere was completely different. Even though the customers returned to their meals, their eyes were still on Mark. Whispers rose, some were self-critical, some were admiring, and some were filled with embarrassment. An hour later, Lumiere's dining room was now empty. The tablecloths had been cleared, the candles extinguished, and the lights dimmed. But in that large hall, all the staff stood in a circle, and in the middle of the circle, with the same peace in his eyes but now much deeper seriousness, stood Mark Ruffalo. He looked around in silence. His gaze met everyone's eyes one by one. Then he spoke. We all make mistakes. His voice was steady, clear. He was neither judging nor belittling. But what really matters is what we do after we make mistakes. Today here, we experienced more than just poor service. Today we saw what prejudiced decisions, hidden arrogance, and a lack of empathy can lead to. He paused. The weight of his words hung in the air. Then his voice was heard again. But this is not a condemnation. This is an opportunity. His eyes fell on Ashley, who was standing at the back of the room. Ashley stood there looking ashamed. Her eyes were red, and her face bore the traces of a difficult night. Mark turned to her without changing his tone, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only humanity. Ashley, Mark's voice was soft as he looked at Ashley, but its meaning was profound. I know what happened today was a mistake, and mistakes, as long as there's effort and a willingness to learn, they can always be fixed. His eyes shifted from Ashley to the entire team. His words echoed slowly. But what you do from here on out, that's what will define who you are. At that moment, everyone in the team seemed to hold their breath. Mark's voice grew a little quieter, but the emotional intensity increased. He spoke from the heart, not from memory. In the world we live in, it's so easy to judge people by their outward appearance, deciding based on what they wear, the cars they drive, where they come from, or how they speak. Unfortunately, it's become a habitual reflex. He took a step forward, reinforcing the sense that he was at the center of a circle. He placed his hands in his pockets. His eyes were no longer fixed on a single person, but were now scanning each face one by one. But I want to ask you something. What happens when you decide to approach someone with true kindness? What happens when you try to see their inner self, not their outer appearance? What happens when you realize that they too have their own struggles, their own life, their own story? He paused. He took a deep breath. The silence in the room echoed his thoughts. We all fight battles that others cannot see. Maybe someone who seems misfit is having the worst day of their life. Maybe the person you judge by their clothes has achieved more than you could ever imagine. But most of all, a small act of kindness towards someone who doesn't seem to deserve it can change the whole world. At that moment, some of the staff averted their eyes. Others had tears in their eyes. The faces showed regret, thoughtfulness, admiration, complex but sincere emotions. In the back corner, Ashley, who had been trying to stay in the shadow of the day, finally raised her head. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were still shining with tears. She spoke in a trembling voice. "I've never thought like this before," she said. "I was so focused on maintaining the restaurant's image, on distinguishing the right customers. I forgot what truly matters. I forgot that everyone, no matter who they are or how they look, has value." She paused, her eyes locked on Mark's. "I promise, Mr. Ruffalo, I'll change." Mark was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head gently. A slight but sincere smile spread across his face. He didn't cross his arms or act authoritarian. He stood there like a human being. He spoke as if giving a sincere message from one person to another. "Don't make that promise to me. Make it to yourself, Ashley." He took another step closer, his voice soft but carrying a powerful meaning. "Real change comes from within. And if you need help along the way, I'm here." Ashley closed her eyes, then took a deep breath and nodded her head decisively. This was not the end, it was the beginning. Mark's words didn't echo off the walls of the room. They resonated within the hearts of those present. An employee stepped forward quietly. His eyes were tearful, but his voice was clear. "This isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small choices we make every day. It's about treating every person we encounter as if they matter. Because they do. And that's what truly defines a place and a person." He took a deep breath. "Mr. Ruffalo, your message was very meaningful. Thank you for reminding us. Lumiere will now be everything you imagined." Mark simply nodded. He responded with a small but heartfelt smile. Then he quietly left the restaurant. The bright streets of Beverly Hills greeted him. The sound of his footsteps softly echoed on the pavement, blending with the rhythm of the night. He paused for a moment at the entrance of Lumiere. He thought about the dining room behind him. A slow smile spread across his face. This wasn't about a restaurant. This was about creating spaces where people feel seen, heard, and valued. Mark knew that night. Even the most challenging moments are opportunities to inspire and transform. As he walked down the street, he wasn't lost in his own thoughts, but in the peace of knowing he had touched someone else's soul. Because at the end of this story, there was only one thought left. In a world where anything is possible, true power lies not in judging, but in accepting. And remember, the small choices you make every day shape not only your surroundings, but who you are as a person. If this story touched you too, leave a comment. What was the smallest yet most impactful